City University Television presents the American Theater Wing Seminars. Working in the theater. This seminar, Design.
A warm welcome to the American Theater Wing's Working in the Theater Seminars. These are now in their 30th year, coming to you from the Graduate Center at the City University of New York. These seminars offer a rare opportunity to explore with the panelists the realities of working in the theater. This panel discussion is with stage designers. We will learn something about how and why these scenic, costume, and lighting designers became professionals, and just how significant their contributions are to the success of any theatrical production. I'm Isabel Stevenson, Chairman of the Board of the American Theater Wing, and now I would like to introduce our moderator for the seminar, the distinguished critic, professor, and new editor of the Best Plays book series, Jeffrey Eric Jenkins. Mr. Jenkins.
Thank you, Isabel. For those of us who spend a great deal of our time in those large, dark rooms we call theaters, we talk a lot about the magic of the theater. Today, we're fortunate to have with us the people I believe are largely responsible for conjuring that magic. To my immediate right, I want to introduce them to you, are Martin Pacladinez, who is a costume designer, Scott Pask, who is a scenic designer, Richard Pilbrow, who is a lighting designer, Jane Greenwood, who is a costume designer, and John Arnone, who is a scenery designer. I want to start first today with Martin Pacladinez. I want to ask you about the process that unfolds. You've got the job. Now, what happens next? What do you do? What is the process? How do you encounter the text? How do you encounter the process? Do you get involved with sketches right away? Do you get involved with the conversations? How does that start for you?
Well, I guess after you go to church and say thank you, you read the script as many times as you feel you should. Hopefully you have time to read it a couple of times, but sometimes you just have to get in there right away. I find for me, I like to get into the director and choreographer as soon as possible, because if I'm on my own, I'll start having too many ideas on my own, and because of what we need is a collaboration, and I need to be led by that director. I need to get into their mind first. I guess that's my first step.
Jane Greenwood, how does that work for you? Is there a similar process? There's a lot of sketching, obviously, that goes into designing costumes, and I imagine there's a process of sketching and sketching. How does that work for you?
Well, it's interesting. I think that Marty brought up something very important, is reading the text. I think the text is the most important to spend time on at the beginning. If there's a living playwright, to be able to talk to him about the play, to be able to talk to the director, the choreographer, so that everybody is working on what they think is the same ideas. And I think it is the ideas that come about with everybody together first that are very helpful in forming the direction you will go. And then I think very often it's sort of back to, the research to decide where, when. I think we need the set designer to tell us where we are, whether it's somewhere imaginary or whether it's somewhere very real, whether the set is going to be imaginary and the clothes are real, and all those decisions that it's very important that we all make together. And then I think we go forward with research and maybe with rough drawings to just share with the director and the choreographer. And then perhaps we further embellish them and make them so that they maybe are a little more exciting for the actors and so on. And it's slow development.
Well, I'm wondering now, in the case of a lighting designer, how does sketching work? I mean, the scenic designers and the costume designers can sketch out their ideas, but a lighting designer is dealing with light and shadow, is dealing with mixing a color palette sometimes in a theater. How does that work for lighting design?
With difficulty. It's very tough. When I began my career, I had a little model theatre with little model lights, and I actually got directors to come and look at it, which actually got me the work. Nowadays, you can do some things with computers, but it isn't. It's getting accurate, but it isn't that accurate. It's power of words and persuasion, I think. I very much agree with what's been said so far. I like to read the script first terribly quickly, because there's that strange thing that you never see the play in the same way again after you've read it the first time.
Right.
So I take that in really quickly, but then of course it's collaboration, it's teamwork. And I do terrible little sketches and compositions of light, but I can't draw, which is probably why I do what I do.
Well, you were the you were the lighting designer on Showboat,
right,
in 1994. Now, that's a show with a lot of lighting. There's a lot of, detail, lighting plots to deal with in that. How do you just have to go into the theater and begin to mix it once you've gotten there? What happens in that process there?
No, in that case, one worked for months with Hal Prince and Florence Klotz, and I've just arrived.
I'm not going to be able to help.
Brilliant scene designer.
That would be Eugene Lee.
Eugene Lee.
The other brilliant scene
Yes,
designer.
the other brilliant scene designer. We spent months because the show is extraordinarily complicated, and there are many very strange changes that had to take place. And then I do endless little sketches and I sort of storyboard the thing in my very amateur way, and then you decide, how the color palette will shift as the costumes shift and the time of day and night shifts. So I do lots of silly little sketches that then gradually gets transferred into sort of concepts for each moment of the play that then finally gets transferred into equipment. But it's all, for me, it has to all be worked out before you get into the theatre. Then you get into the theatre and you usually change it all.
Right. You have to rework it when you get back into the theatre. John Arnone, I'm wondering about this process. I've noticed that you've done a lot of work with Edward Albee recently. You designed the play about the baby and the revival of Tiny Alice, and now The Goat, or Who is Sylvia. How do you feel that your work encounters Albee's ideas, Albee's oeuvre?
Well, I don't know, that's a rather loaded question. I mean, Edward is quite a character. But the great thing about Edward is that he involves himself in the process from the very first meeting. And Edward, being a director, even though he didn't direct any of these productions you're alluding to, must be encompassed in terms of his directorial ideas about the piece, as well as you're sitting with the author himself. He is the seat of authority. So you listen to Edward, and you listen to him very carefully. And Edward, in the beginning, is as I think most people are with their creation, somewhat distrustful. That what are you going to do with it? It's going to be some conceptual nightmare that I'm going to have to run screaming from the theater every night, or we're going to have to fire you, dear boy. But
well, that hasn't happened.
Not yet.
It seems to be a successful
I hear he's working on a new one, so I may have another chance. You listen to Edward talk about the piece, and certainly you have become as expert with the text as you can. Edward is very cautious in terms of wordplay, as you could very well imagine, and he doesn't suffer fools gladly. So you have to get over the hump of being careful. You have to get over the hump of being intimidated by Edward. You have to engage Edward as you would engage any director, any costume lighting, or other set designer that you might be co-designing with. And once you find the key to that, once you open the door, once you can, look at Edward slightly askance, once you can see that little, evil twinkle in his eye, you know that you're halfway there. And then he's on your side. You know, something that, for instance, with the goat, something that he describes as wanting to be very realistic, is something that is translated in a somewhat abstract way on stage through the set design. And both David S. Bjornson and I were petrified that we had worked as hard as we could, and that he wouldn't like it. And he came in on a Monday after we'd worked on it over the weekend and embraced it and said, "Why isn't it more abstract? Why isn't it more angular? Why isn't it more imaginative?" And so he untied our hands. You know, once he, I think began to trust us and to see in three-dimensional form where we could go with the play, and he saw it living in this white model, he encouraged us to go to take it even another step further.
And you did then?
Oh yeah, but to a degree. You know, this is very sophisticated work. I mean, this is not. And not to inflate the work, because we are talking about the work, not about someone's career or someone's ideas. I mean, this is the Goat and working with Edward and David S. Bjornson are like the purest example of a very rarefied way of working, very extreme way of working, very sophisticated. You know, you're working with people who are in there whose ages range from 50 to 73, I think. And all of that experience, that well of experience, it counts for something. You know, I mean, the fact that you can sit there with Edward and say, "Oh my God, you know more, you've seen more, you've experienced more than I ever will." As some of these younger people in the audience today, I think, you'll never have the same experience that we had. You'll never have the same opportunities that we had, but you will make your own opportunities. You know, you will see your own, experience unfold as richly as ours did. And we've been very lucky. You know, a lot of us have been in the right place at the right time.
I think it makes a tremendous difference when you have the playwright. I mean, it does alter the way you work, because there is that tangent person who has a great deal to say about the characters. And I think that's very true with Edward, that he has brings a great deal to your understanding of the characters.
Also, he's very, very clear about your choices. I mean, Edward's favorite word that hangs over your head that you're waiting for him to pronounce on anything you do is, well, that is a little cliche, don't you think? So whenever you hear that, you see his lips forming into the cliche, and oh God, get me out of the room.
It could be true of him too. In a funny way, he loves to have somebody in a pair of plain slacks and a tweed jacket and maybe a blue shirt, and I keep looking at him many times as he's telling me this, and he's standing there in those exact clothes.
Scott Pask, I'm wondering about the approaches you've taken in some recent works that you have done. Of course, you're represented off-Broadway now with Take Me Out, and it looks like that's coming to Broadway. And you're represented on Broadway with Amour. And these are two very different types of approaches to theater. One is somewhat more realistic, even though it shifts, Take Me Out, it shifts back and forth. But in Amour, you're dealing with a magical, fantastic world that seems to be the realm of the scene designer. The scene designer has to cause
shape
that
the
magic.
universe.
Yeah. How do you approach those two different? Can you speak about that a little bit?
Sure. The workshop of Amour we did about a year ago, and when we walked in there, it was very simple, and we just started by shaping the space. We did it all in the corner. So we just, instead of taking this giant rehearsal room, we just took it, and James said, let's just start limiting the space a little bit and start looking at how we're going to play with people and move around. And it was a very austere workshop with very simple pieces, and the effects were very limited. We used a rolling rack with bungee cord to take this whole idea of this everyman that suddenly has this ability to walk through walls, and just brought it to a very, very simple skeletal form. And then when we were designing it for the music box, I was still intrigued with that corner, And we talked about these references of Magritte and the whole notion of the surrealism and Paris in the 50s and these seductive sort of images, but that corner just became something that I didn't want to lose. So again, as we all keep saying, the research is so critical. I mean, stacks and stacks and stacks of Atget photographs of period painters, Magritte, and just kind of sifting through all of that and really trying to get your head into the Parisian, that attitude, and also just the location is so specifically Montmartre, and really looking at those streets and the scale of it, and then playing with the scale of the musical. It's not a large musical, and we're putting it on a Broadway stage, so it needs to kind of tailor itself to this gem of a space and of the musical that it is. So we took that corner and then started bringing the idea of the street into it, and then to take it to a place that had these more surreal qualities. I just sort of painted it with this Magritte sky on it. So you had the relief of the street to give it scale and give the people scale. And then again, I started throwing this layer of cobble on it. So it became this wall. And it was just taking that and again, reading it over and over. And it's 38 scenes. And it was a heavily storyboarded show. And just trying to come up with an idea that had a journey to it. Taking this wall and this ground plan that we loved and moving it to an idea of this wall that then becomes penetrated, so it became this heavy wall in its opening scenes. And then as these windows began to open and doors began to open and pieces of scenery would kind of shift in and out, it became this almost storybook that became very, very translucent and transparent. And by the end of the show, these windows became very much more closed down again. It became the wall, and then he actually gets stuck in this wall at the very end. He loses his ability, and then again, he's like pushed into the wall. So he kind of completes that picture at the very end. We started with this idea of this wall, and then it ends there with him. Take Me Out was, I mean, the design of that, the Donmar in London where it began, is a co-production with the Public Theatre. I'd been fortunate enough to do a show there in the previous year, and the space really dictates incredibly poetic solutions. It's so limited. It has this balcony, or what they call this, the ring and the circle, and a thrust, really, and a back wall that is so ever-present. And Take Me Out to play that has a number of interior locations, and then you're on the field. And how do you deal with that? And Joe Mantello, the director, is great, and just such a visually brilliant director, as well as James Lapine with Amour. He comes from such a graphic design background that their visual information, they're very acute, and I found that really incredible and inspiring to work with them. And now that I've worked with Joe a number of times, the process is something that I value deeply with him, because we go through these ideas and you feel like what you've gotten to is inevitable and that it couldn't be done another way. And with Take Me Out, we needed these lockers, and you need something to deal with the scale of these guys, and it takes place in the locker room. And then this field, and we started thinking about what are the icons of the field. And I'm always interested in environmental approaches to spaces, and trying to play with the notions of the different scales, of like being in this locker room. There's sort of an interrogation scene, offices and things like that, which can be done very, very simply, but you want to be able to limit the scale for those. And then when we're in the ball field with one of the characters just going through this incredible speech about how inspired he is, you just want to open up the whole world. So I did this stadium surround that is reflective of Yankee Stadium, and it went through the whole theater, and then the lockers were sort of embraced by this large scoreboard that became this overall structure. We kind of merged the two pieces, the lockers for all the men, and then this scoreboard with this large bulb field that was also dealing with the showmanship of the game and the play, and it was just kind of pushing and pushing and pushing, getting all those things to kind of fit together. And once they did, there wasn't really anywhere else to go. And the space really helps dictate that as well. The limitations made all of those units kind of marry well with each other.
Yeah, it's wonderful the way it goes to so many different sort of areas. I saw it at the Donmar, and I really was very impressed.
Exactly.
Yes, it was terrific.
Martin, you're a two-time Tony Award winner for Thoroughly Modern Millie and for the recent revival of Kiss Me Kate. And we have a lot of aspiring designers before us today. I'm wondering if you can tell us if you feel as though you have developed a visual vocabulary of some sort. And I'd like others to address this issue as well. That, do you feel like there are, I don't know, techniques or tricks or something that you return to, or do you, tell me, what do you think?
I guess, excuse me, I guess we do all have techniques like you were saying, but I think a lot of us hope that we don't have one specific style. I'm sure you know. Millie was born out of such the set was already designed, it was such a big glamorous production, so I had to push up all of the style to collaborate, to compete with it, if you will. It's sort of an interesting question the way you're doing it, because of course what you do respond to everything, so hopefully every time you design something it is it's different every time you design for something else. But by the same token, of course, we are the body of our work. I'm not supposed to touch that mic. We are the body of our work, and so it's inevitable that we will be drawing on things that we've learned, and hopefully not indulging in our own cliches, I guess, but using the strength of it when we can. I mean, I guess I'm a sucker for a red dress in a musical. I make sure that happens. But and as I told the rest of my team, the director and choreographer and playwrights and everything, I said, she can have a red dress. We'll just have to make sure it's the right red dress in the right scene. You know, so you do sort of play with things like that. I'm not sure if that's really what you're asking.
Well, I think it is. I'm talking about how do you begin to tap into, yourself, and how that begins to develop, and how that visual vocabulary, or for want of another expression, might work. Jane Greenwood is a veteran of more than 70 Broadway productions and has an ongoing and has an ongoing relationship with Lincoln Center Theater.
Yes, yeah.
And I know you've worked many times with Dan Sullivan on his productions. I want you to address this. I'd like you to address this question about visual vocabulary.
Yes. Well, it's sort of. I think we do develop a visual vocabulary. It's inevitable as you go along. Each show you sort of gain a little more sort of sense of who you are as a designer, I guess. I think that it's very... We do get typecast somewhat. I can say that I have done many, many plays in which the clothes have been the last thing that you would want to talk about, in that they are totally unnoticeable, that it's part of what the sort of framework of the place and the people are, and they are sort of timeless and very often quite undistinguished. And I always say, well, when it comes to the sequins, they pass my name by very quickly, but when it comes to downtrodden and depressed, But in a way, whatever you do, whatever the project is, you always sort of attack it with a slightly different way, because it's a different project, and and everybody says, well, what's the most exciting project you've ever designed? I always sort of say, well, it's the next. Yeah. I mean, because you're always being recharged and learning about something else, and it's a new territory. You go off and you learn about new people and new things. And
How
I
does
think
it start?
we're very fortunate.
Do you do sketches first?
Oh, in between, yes. I do sketches. I do little sketches at the beginning, and I very often storyboard a show. Sort of, I find it very interesting to go through scene by scene by scene and see who's there in the scene. And with the scenery, we may have the same space, but different people come into it. So the picture changes slightly as each group of people come in. And then, of course, the scenery changes completely and the same group of people are there. So you're making constantly different pictures. And I think it's very good to have the thought of those pictures.
How close do you work with a scenic designer?
Well, very close. I think it's like everything. We need a director, and he's the captain of the ship. And I think that we all revolve around that. And I think when everybody's working well together, then the wheel turns round well. And, you know, you feel very good about it, and it's wonderful when it is like that. And you know what's fascinating is it always seems that when they're wonderfully successful productions, everybody seems to have a good time together. And when things aren't quite working well, you find that little groups tend to sort of slide away at dinner breaks. And you begin to think, well, where are we all? Why aren't we all rolling this wheel together? And I think that's very indicative, actually, of how productions do sort of come together.
Richard, what's your experience of that, with working with groups, collaborating with different directors and that sort of thing?
Oh, a total agreement. I mean, lighting is, you know, down the totem pole, and the director is in charge. The scene designer sets the overall ambience and visual style of the
But we're no good unless you put the lights on.
No, but then we turn the lights on, and we're trying to assist everyone tell the story with light. We're also trying to reveal the actors in a wonderful manner, in a manner that's appropriate to the physical situation that the scenery and the costumes have put them in. So it's a totally collaborative process. Now, I would like to think every show is completely different. I would, of course, be lying, because it isn't, because one has a sort of memory that if you put a light over there and it hits the back of their chin, it might look quite good at that moment. So you do, I fear, fall back on personal, I hate, cliches, it may be, of course, but one tries terribly hard not to, because every single situation is different. The words are different, the director's different, the designer's different, so hopefully the lighting is different too. You're trying to pick up, all your antennae are picking up inspiration from everyone else, and then you hope to deliver 115% of what you've been asked for. Sure. That's your dream.
John, how about you?
Well, I know that I was thinking while Jane was talking, I was remembering sitting in the theater with her when we did Fortune's Fool together not long ago.
Yes.
And there were some finishing touches. I mean, we worked very closely up front. The show was fabric laden. I mean, it was overdressed to a point where it didn't look like anything I thought I could ever control. And so on several occasions, I mean, after giving Jane the initial swatches to try and help coordinate pieces and stuff, you begin to, then she shares, the swatches for the costumes with you, and you begin to see how the palette sort of unfolds and plays back on itself. I mean, Martin said something about one topping the other. I mean, the idea of the design, I think. Well, we're talking about a lot of things right now. We're talking about vocabulary, we're talking about language, we're talking about text. This is very complex stuff, and we're given very little time.
And collaboration.
Very little time to investigate what we're talking about, almost an encyclopedia of knowledge and learning here. But we sit down and, given 30 minutes, given an hour, whatever, a lunch break, and start moving the swatches around. And saying, well, no, that fabric lining would look much better as the main body of the fabric when they come on with this particular gown. There will be a nice complementary sense of, color harmony there that you might not see in the very beginning, or it's brought out to you that your taste in this particular upholstery fabric is quite frankly rancid. And this other choice would, so she saves me from, making disastrous.
I said rancid, never.
But saves me from, making disastrous choices, which, because I might not be seeing the whole picture, or I might be working so quickly that I don't see every little detail. And when I'm working with, curtain fabrics, when I'm working with 5 different upholstery fabrics, when I'm working with all different carpets, when I'm trying to coordinate even colors of the flowers in the vases. You know, and all of this
We all
has
know
to
about
be,
flowers.
you know, carefully thought out in terms of what the lights can do to it, how they can accent it, how they can turn it to mud, how they. There's an interesting thing in Fortune's Fool in the second act. The walls were sort of irredeemably blue striped with just a hint, but we softened it with just a hint of sort of a gold mist that went over the top of it, almost like a pentimento that you couldn't really put your hand on. It was like a trompe l'oeil, a swag, and in putting sort of a complementary, you know, color combination up there, we were able to get so many more variations with the lights and with the costumes. I mean, the star would walk on in just this like black silhouetted costume and cut through the room like a knife, whereas the heroine was dressed in very beautiful sort of flounce, lilac and blue and gown. Would you describe that as accurate as
it
a
was
color?
lilac.
So the color was very contiguous to the wall color, to the stripes. So there was a wonderful thing where she could almost blend in, or she could, with the lighting, depending on where she was standing on the stage, accent and come out and stand out. So in using all three elements of the design, you're able to construct a geometric form which, in theory, which you can then play with once it gets on stage and actualize it.
Who
and
makes
actually
those
see it.
decisions? Who makes those decisions?
Who makes the decisions? Edward Albee, when he's available.
Okay. And now, underneath that,
We like I said, I mean, Jane and I would work on you know, color swatching and fabric choices at a lunch break or just sitting down in the theater.
you bring swatches of fabric in?
It's always helpful, you know, when the lady sits on the couch and her dress doesn't match the couch, you know, it's things
Right.
like
But
those are things that seem to be frivolous to talk about, but in fact you really have to sort of plan and
But wouldn't you have to work with lighting to see what they
yes,
Yeah,
yes.
absolutely.
And that's where you come in then.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I always study every costume color, every detail of all that terribly carefully. And I mean, as John says, these things are very complicated. I mean, the scenery stands there for a certain period of time, and the costumes are on the stage for a certain period of time, because the lighting can affect the entire composition of the stage constantly. It can change constantly. And you said an actor can come into focus, and you can beautify, make normal, or destroy the costume wherever it is on the stage. So it's a very subtle business.
Does the playwright decide this with you? Does the playwright work with you on the lighting because of
Not
what he has
often.
seen?
I suppose I don't often have the benefit of working for living playwrights. Harold Pinter I did recently, but he wasn't here very long, and the play wasn't very long either. But most of my playwrights are probably dead, I think.
Sometimes that's a good idea.
But when you're lighting a show, the director is usually right next to you, isn't
Yes,
it? More and
absolutely.
more, I find, in a lot of things.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, the director is absolutely in charge, in my view.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm the
mine
director's
too.
servant, you know. I hope to contribute, as I
Very
said,
important.
more than the director expects, but he's absolutely in charge. If I've lit something and I can sit there and think, oh, wow, that is near perfect, isn't it? If the director comes in and says, what's that rubbish? I change it all. I mean, that's how life is in the theatre. And I think somebody's in charge. It's the director in charge.
I think
And the team. I mean, it's a collective.
The
But the director's the head.
The other consideration I think that people don't always realize is that we all design these elements, and then it all comes together in the theatre. And, you know, it's somewhat of a shock the first time you see it all. And don't you find that, Marty, when they first
horrible
go on
mood.
stage
Horrible
the
mood
first
the
time?
first day of dress rehearsal.
Yes.
I'm
And
like crying.
And Richard, you must feel, you know, with the lighting,
Oh, dreadful.
suddenly you see it all, and you all have the experience of your set, you've been for a week, the technical, getting it all there, and then suddenly everything arrives at the
And
point
people
where
try to
you've got
get excited and
look
fun
at the
about
picture.
it, but by the same token, we did a production together, The Life, a musical about the street life in New York in the 70s, hookers and pimps, and you never saw a lot of this stuff because I bought it. I mean,
Yes,
no one
that's
saw
right.
it
That's
until
right.
the
And
dress
so
rehearsal.
it's
That's right.
the first
That's
time
right.
when you actually get it all together on stage.
So for 24 hours, I didn't say anything because I was crying. I was doing all of this stuff with lights, and I thought, oh my God. Sometimes
Yeah.
good and sometimes just, oh my God.
Cal, I remember when Marty and I were doing a production of Harley Granville Barker's Waste. I happened to know one of his assistants, and I said, I'd like to, say something to Marty. He said, come back in 2 days. He's very upset right now. He does. He gets very upset.
I don't know that that's your
It's
opinion.
easier with it's easier with set designers, I think, because we see it in the shop.
In the shop.
Yes,
and
yes.
And it's so, it's not abstract at all. It's like there, and you're going to.
We do it, I think it's just because we are, not to, it's a big point. We're actually in a room with a lot of people in a very personal situation. We're putting
Taking their
on,
clothes off
all
and
of a
then
sudden-
putting them on
and
again.
Things all of a sudden that you thought were great aren't fitting, or something's not there, or you think something's, half the costume's there, and you're afraid that when everyone sees it, they're going to like it only half there, so that, we're sensitive. But
Well, some of the actors, the chairs don't answer back.
My favorite thing is when the director says, rather coolly, he turns to you and says, "Is that the couch we're using?" And I've come up with no, that's the couch from Les Mis. We've borrowed it for the evening. It's going back. Our couch will be here in 2 days.
I remember a set designer telling me that a couch had to be taken out of the New Amsterdam roof that had been used in rehearsal because the director and the actors wanted it. And it was just an old abandoned couch up there in a rehearsal hall.
Yes,
And it actually was used in the production.
Well,
Because they all grew so fond of it.
Well, there is
It was
that whole
just
thing
the
of like
one.
being very careful about what goes in rehearsal,
Yes.
because you
Yes.
know
Very
those things
important.
are going to. Oh, can't we have that stool back? Or
Yes.
what about?
And it's
really
usually a black,
careful,
broken, four-legged stool.
covered in formica.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right. That's right. I mean, I don't know how other lighting designers are, but certainly I find the whole thing more nerve-wracking every time I do it, and I have lit a few shows. But I just did this Our Town with Paul Newman that's coming into Broadway, and it's a very modest show. I mean, Our Town is quite modest, and it's Tony Walton, who is probably my closest friend, who's designing. I've worked with him hundreds of times, and we have, I don't know, a couple of hundred instruments, and one focuses them, and the actors come on stage, and I like lighting with the actors. I hate doing it with an empty stage, and they start rehearsing, and what have I done wrong? This is just awful. And then you get through the rehearsal somehow, and then you say, well, nip up the ladder and move that 2 inches that way, and that one 3 inches that way, and then, oh, it's a little better. But this is an ongoing process. I go through 2 dress rehearsals and 3 takes, and it's only like the last one you sort of think, well, might do.
Well, do you ever, after it's opened, do you ever go back and tinker with your designs at all? Have you ever had a, because they don't like to do that. They like to. You've been paid. Everybody's been paid. You don't want to pay more union. And
Not terribly popular in New York. In London, where I used to work at the National, we used to do that a great deal. Go back and also I'm a great believer in teamwork with one's crew.
yes.
Lighting is not necessarily an absolute automatic thing. Now, this is a technological issue because nowadays people tend to just press a button and it moves. But in the better days, the electrician can bring something to it. The board operator can bring something to the movement of light that often you haven't got by opening night. I always encourage my crew at the National Theatre, if you think that should accelerate or deaccelerate, do it. I'd like you to phone up and tell me, and I'll come back and look. But it's again all a partnership. The crew are all part of that same network of the creativity of the show.
How has technology affected design, or specifically focus on lighting design for a moment? How have lighting design styles changed over your career, and how has technology affected that? I mean, you say now they just press a button and it happens, and you don't get that
That's a
sort of...
very good point. How do you get a spotlight on a person?
Well, it's helpful if the person stands in the right place.
But Lillian Gibbs once told me that she stopped working on the stage when they did away with footlights.
Yes,
Because
that's
there
a
was
long
no way
subject.
that you got lighting up.
Yes, that's a very long subject and a good one. No, I mean, the technology has changed beyond comprehension. But as all technology, some things remain exactly the same. I mean, one of my favorite lights was invented in 1933, and David Hersey and Andy Bridge use it, not only me. But yes, now we have automated lighting. That, you can put any light anywhere if you can afford them, or if your producer can afford them. They are expensive. Computers control it all. You can memorize things. I mean, lighting is actually, in many ways, much easier than it used to be, because basically you can compose a picture with hundreds of spotlights that can change from one picture to another, to another, to another. In the old days, your main consideration was, could the men push the handles at the right moment in time? Nowadays, it's all, it's all automated.
Although, I one of my two favorite experiences working with lighting in the theater, lighting designers, was as an observer, watching Theron Musser's designs for Ballroom. Which, admittedly, at the time, Theron, of course, was working with a very, infant, freshman-type computer, but which would break down frequently. But still, she was working with instruments that were somewhat fundamental and somewhat, certainly not as sophisticated as moving lights and what we have today. But I remember her creating color in the air like I had never seen created before, just like split-second changes. I mean, whole sort of songs and poems happened in the air with her light cues. And it wasn't just the computer that was doing it. And my other favorite observation was in the old Playwrights Horizons, which none of you will ever see, but you'll see the new Playwrights Horizons in April. In the upstairs room, the little small room upstairs, watching Jennifer Tipton assemble a coffee can and a light bulb and C-clamp it to a pipe. And I just sat there and watched her, and she finally looked down and saw me, and she said, "Get out of the building."
But that's the magic of the theater, isn't it?
And I thought, but most of us are certainly old enough to have, been in theatrical, experiences where we were working in the basement with some sort of dye pot that, that on some, rickety burner, who were assembling lights out of coffee cans, who were spending. I remember when we first did Vanities, that was a joint venture between Playwrights Horizons and Lion Theater Company, and we had no money. There was no budget. And Playwrights Horizons was offering $100 for the fees for the writer, the director, and the designer. So we took those fees, those $100, which the times 3 was $300, and bought the lumber to build the set by ourselves in the evening. And even when that show moved off Broadway and ran for like 5 years, it was the same set that we had cobbled together for $300 back then. And it's sort of like that, sort of what I try to remember, those days which were an extension of my student days, where the work was had an honesty and a fundamental level, hands-on level that perhaps some of the technology today doesn't necessarily afford. I mean, the thing with technology today that we access is that to what degree do you understand it for it to amplify and inform the design? If it's just moving stuff around, it just moves stuff around. But if you understand technology, or the technology, which is not very sophisticated, I mean, it's not much more than assembling cars, and a Ford motor plant is the program. But if you understand it and know how to work with it, especially in a musical, it can, add to the vocabulary, add to the language. If you don't understand it, if you don't understand how to work with it, if you don't know how to turn its subtleties, you have no business even walking in the front door.
It's a great
I don't understand it, and I want you to tell me, how do you get water coming out in the shower and take me out on stage? That's what I want to know.
That's a great question, actually. How does that work?
How does that work?
And in London,
And how hot is it so that those guys don't
It's
freeze?
really hot, actually. It's really hot.
Explain how
It's
this
better.
works.
I mean, the funny thing is the guys here love it, and the minute they got back from London, they said, we can't do showers in the UK. And I find that actually traveling there, the showers are never
As good.
as good as they are here. So it was like typical that the production would be the same way.
Do you mean on the stage or in the
Both.
hotel?
That translated. The hotels weren't great, and we couldn't get it. We did it pretty well there, but there's a big reservoir above the stage, and
Would you explain what happens on stage?
in the play, there's a shower scene, actually 2 of them, and this, which is kind of hidden in the grid, there's a line of showers that descends over a platform, and 2 of them go on. They go on with through the electric board. They're automated. They come on at different times. There's a group of 6 guys out there, buck naked, and then it's filtered through. It comes down from above and it goes to the floor. The floor at the Public Theater was built up a foot, so there's a drain, and it's all
Which theater is it?
And they
It's
all
in the
take a
men's
shower.
They
I mean,
take
it's
a
wonderful.
shower.
Yeah, it sounds good.
And it's pumped out each night and cleaned. It's almost dealt with like a pool would be dealt with, but it's not visible. It's not seen. Like Metamorphosis, you kind of have that water there, and it's such a visual aspect. Here we did a floor that has to be architectural and deal with castered pieces that are moving around, chair feet and all of that, but then also needs to drain. But you just didn't want it to be like a subway grating, something like that. It needed to be an architectural surface that had some character, and it just worked. It's with the tricks of technology too. There's just automation to get this nozzle to go on at the same time as this one. This actor comes in at this time. This one comes in at another. They both have to go off at the same time, and then the rig goes out. And then another time they come on at the same time. So it's very, very specific in all the placement of the actors and.
How big an area is it?
I would say it's about 12 feet across, and when we move it, it's actually going to be a linear shower instead of what we have now, which they're kind of springing off in 2 directions up and down stage.
How would that work in a smaller theater when you moved?
At the Damar, it was the same system, manually flown, and then it was run through the light board because they were done with electronic little automated pieces.
Do you ever smash people in the front row?
They're pretty close to the people on the front row. You got a little ambient mist, I would say, but it's not too bad. It's not too bad.
It's a wonderful phenomenon to see.
Oh, thanks.
I lit the original version of Singing in the Rain in London at the Palladium, and that was a true nightmare. It poured with rain through the whole number.
Sure.
And we had like 8 light rain curtains and into a tank. But the trouble is the tank had to be struck in like 45 seconds, and it was full of water. Absolute nightmare. So
The thing with that is like
fun,
it's fun, but it's also like the thing is like the biggest problem is drips. Like, is it
Yes.
going to drip through
Yes.
the show?
Yes.
And you
Yes.
design these rigs, and you work with the technical staff, and you come up with these great solutions. We did these. It seems sort of elementary, but we take the pipe, have it make a little kink up and down and around, and before it gets to the nozzle. So if there's any standing water in it, it's not flowing down to the nozzle. It stays behind it and needs the pressure to push it up and over that hook. So there's simple things, but it saves you from watching a rain fest during the whole
My
show.
favorite water effects are the Bellagio in Las Vegas.
I saw it last week.
I'm a sucker for that. I'll just
amazing.
stand there for 30 minutes
Yeah.
and watch
All
it. But
those fountains.
excellent work. Have you
Yeah.
seen the fountain, Isabel, at the Bellagio in Las Vegas?
Yes.
Pretty
Astonishing.
impressive. Huh?
Quite astonishing.
So, I guess this sort of something that John Arnone said drove me in another direction slightly. I started thinking about, you were talking about your student days and the extension of your student days, and what was happening in those times. And we have a group of students here today who are thinking about design and who want to do design. I guess the question that arises is how do you get started, and how do you keep it going? And clearly you were pooling your resources with two other designers to make a show, to create the magic of theater. How does that happen? Scott, for you, how did that?
Well, I had the great fortune of also going to Yale, being educated by Ming, Jennifer, Jane, and a number of brilliant people that are there. And then when I got out, I worked with some people that I'd assisted with. I worked on an opera with the designer Marina Dragic, the assistant director of Andrei Serban, and I got to be friends. She was at Columbia, I was at school. We got out, we did a show together. We started doing a show downtown. I was painting things in my apartment, and it ended up being the Donkey Show. And it's still running off Broadway, and that was one of the earlier sort of shows that I did. And then just running around with my book. I got a really great break from New York Theater Workshop. Jim Nicola was a great supporter of mine getting out of school, and I got a main stage show there pretty soon after I got out. And then just...
It seems to me that you had to know engineering as well.
My background is architecture. My bachelor's in architecture, and that is something that really informs the work that I do. I love materials. I seek out new materials to use in theater, and it's interesting to me. And the whole notion of dealing with the environment and the notion of emotional responses that the work can elicit has always been important to me. I worked and was fortunate to work with assist Robert Brill, and Cabaret was a really incredible experience to be the associate on, because it was shaping the audience's experience from the moment you reached through the doorway, and being able to compress and expand and shape an audience's experience and their reactions from that facet has always been important, and has always been sort of fueled by architectural, that quest that I had in school for that. And then it completely translated to when I was given the commission of Urinetown, to be able to take that off Broadway, find a space that was in this sort of old judicial room, sit in there with John Rando and decide how are we going to put on this musical, pull everything out and kind of recreate it as though we reimagined the space and took details from the step risers. I'm a big fan of just running around and looking at surfaces and studying materials that are real, and then taking them into spaces, because the more real I can make that room, the more, again, that like Urinetown goes away, because it felt like it was a part of that space that we were in. The details of the balconies were all lifted from the stair risers in this sort of landmarked stair tower, and developing a vocabulary that in a way kind of looked like it was there.
Well, I think what we'll do is we'll try to pick up with this. We're going to take after our little pause, we're going to take a short pause and ask Isabel Stevenson to tell us about the great works of the American Theater Wing.
Before we get back to the American Theater Wing working in the theater seminar on design, I would like to remind you that these seminars are only one of the many year-round programs that the Wing undertakes. You are probably familiar with the American Theater Wing's Tony Awards, which is given for excellence in the Broadway theater. We also have important grants programs providing aid to off and off Broadway theaters. We now offer 6 different scholarships for promising students to pursue studies in the theater arts. We have an expanded career guide program for beginning professionals. As a long-established charity dating back from World War I and again in World War II, when we operate our famous stage door canteen, all of our programs are designed to reward and promote excellence in the theater, to introduce young people and their families to theater and the magic it unfolds. We take pride in the work we do and are grateful to our members and everyone whose contributions help make possible the dynamic programs of the American Theater Wing. We are proud to be a part of this exciting industry as we continue to provide services to the theater and to the community. So now let's return to our panel on design and our moderator, Jeffrey Eric Jenkins. Jeffrey?
Thank you, Isabel. I think we have some questions today, and the questioners have lined up at the microphone, and so we're going to take a few questions to start off with.
Hi, I'm Esther. I'm from Manhasset High School, and my question is to anyone of you. It's how do you stand up for your ideas without being trampled over by everyone else, and how do you collaborate efficiently without losing the essence of your original idea?
So how do you collaborate effectively without having your own ideas?
Well, I think to some extent you try and wait, delay as much as possible. I mean, what we talked about earlier about the idea of memorizing, of becoming part of the text and having that as sort of your Bible that you have to fall back on. I know what I do, especially since I'm usually, as a set designer, called on to work with the director first before we introduce the lighting or the costume designer, although we try and introduce them as quickly as possible, is to listen to the director listening to the play. I mean, I believe that since the director is going to be the fearless leader, the director is going to be our Lord and Master, that it's important to find within his or her consciousness, his or her process, his or her imagination, what he or she is looking for in terms of a concept for the piece, in terms of an overall design for the piece, how the text is brought to life. So I try and listen. I try and listen before I have any ideas which are so set in concrete that it would destroy my life to see them overruled or to have to change. In fact, I think that's what collaboration, one of the elements, is the idea of change, the idea of development, the idea of spontaneity, the imagination, the imaginative process. Once you grab it by its feet and yank it down and make it walk around on the ground, it becomes an awkward sort of thing. I mean, this is an elusive idea that you're talking about, but a very, very important one.
And if you have something that you feel very strongly about, I think timing is very important. How you get it sort of out at the right time, with the right people around.
Yes.
So, be very canny about when is the best time to suggest it.
I mean, there is that, like, even just getting those sketches out there, doing what you think is going to be useful, but then slipping that one in a few back from the ones that you're showing off at the beginning.
Right.
So it's so
or if you think
crazy,
it isn't the right time, just shuffle it and then say, maybe.
I know, alluding to the production that we were talking about earlier today, Fortune's Fool, that Jane and I designed together, there was some dressing in the second act, a bowl of oranges next to the Recamier. And I thought, well, the Recamier was all in sort of a blue, a very rich blue. And I thought, well, it might be nice just in terms of complementary colors. Let's put oranges in a bowl next to the Recamier. And I came back a couple nights later, and there were apples in the bowl, red apples that were so red, I mean, so clearly, red apples that you could barely even see them on stage. And I went backstage to the stage manager and said, who changed the apples to oranges? And one night, I said, well, there's an actor in the play who thinks it would be a good idea on his exit to pick up an apple, toss it into the air, take a bite out of it, and then exit. And he couldn't do that with an orange. And I said, get the oranges back there. I came back a couple weeks later, and lo and behold, there were apples there again. And I went back to the stage manager, who was by this time completely tired of seeing me. And I said, there are apples on the stage again next to the Recamier, as if this is the most important thing in my life. And she said, well, someone told the director, a friend of the director said that there would be no way that at this time of year they would have oranges in Russia.
Oh, dear.
I said, we're in New York, for Christ's sake. The play takes place in Russia, but we're in New York. So at that point, I gave up the battle, and it was oranges for apples.
But do we all believe that theatre is essentially a collaborative art form? Finally, collaboration with the audience. Because no play comes to life until it has an audience as part of it. The actors are deeply affected by the audience. They're not just taking direction like Automan, are they? I mean, the actors are part. So the whole process is completely collaborative, and I think we'd all be doing something else if we felt to the contrary.
Except I do think collaboration is talked about a great deal, and it is sort of like the holy grail that we all talk about. But you know, if somebody really wants something and really digs their heels in, it's surprising how collaboration all falls to the side walls.
We say collaboration, not to be too negative, but a lot of times we have to admit we're working professionally together.
Yeah.
Collaboration is the golden mean. It's what you aspire to. A lot of shows are not as much of a collaboration as other ones, are there?
Right.
I mean, you know,
Perhaps
of course
negotiation
it's
is
there.
one of the
choosing
negotiation.
just
Although-
making.
Well,
Yeah.
negotiation and political skills are absolutely part of all our work,
Oh,
isn't it?
dear.
You wouldn't survive 10 minutes if you couldn't talk yourself out of such and such a situation.
Although
Right.
what Richard was saying about the audience collaboration, I think, is important. I have a good example when we were in previews for the Edward Albee's The Goat. The ending is, which I can't tell you, but the ending is very traumatizing, and very, very traumatizing for the audience and the actors. And there must have been 3 or 4 different endings before they finally resolved and settled on the final ending. But it was because of the audience's response and participation in response to the ending of the play that Edward Albee and the director David S. Bjornson and even the producers got involved and said, "Well, oh no, you can't do that. That's impossible. I mean, the audience will." And then ... and the next night the audience would respond to the different ending. So after about 4 or 5 different endings, with the audience's participation.
Jane, on costumes, when do you do fittings? And how do you schedule fittings for your costume fittings?
I'm sorry, Isabel.
Costume fittings, when
Yes.
do you do that?
When do you do it? Well, after the first, when you go into the costume shop and you talk about the design, and you have a muslin made, which is usually in a different fabric to the one that you're going to end up, so that experiments can be done, and you can look at it on the actor, actress, and make changes if you want to, and mark where you want certain things to be put on, or designs, or what have you. But it gives you a sort of canvas on the body that you can make a lot of decisions about. And
So what do you do when you have a costume and your actor doesn't want to wear it? When do you stand up for that idea?
what do you do when the actor doesn't want to wear it?
Yeah, well, okay, that's never happened to you.
Many times. Oh, it happens all the
What
time.
happened to you?
Well, I get the other jobs. You can say.
You have to sometimes throw your hands up and admit defeat. You sometimes have to be able to convince them that it is actually the right garment for that particular scene. And a lot of, well, of course, you look stunning in this can help. It helps a lot, wouldn't you say, Marty?
Yeah, it's good to pay the elevator man to say it as they leave.
Yes. Yes.
It was stunning. No,
Yes.
It was very interesting. I just did a show out of town, and there was a great, I went away from the subject, but I'll finish this. A great singer, a woman in it, and she was always in jeans and flat shoes and everything, and it was the first time she was acting, not just singing. And the work we had to do to make sure that she felt comfortable to all of a sudden wear evening gowns and mink stoles, and like it would be hard work, right? No.
But for her, it probably was a big jump.
And it took a couple of fittings where we had to gain that trust of her just saying, why am I not in Reeboks?
That's the word. You have to have the actor trust you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if they trust you, they will make the journey with you.
Yeah.
Do you provide undergarments for their fitting?
Yes, very often.
What do you have?
What kind of undergarments?
Yeah.
Well, whatever the period requires.
Right.
Sometimes it's a corset, sometimes it's a G-string, sometimes it's nothing. You know, it all depends what is needed for the period of the play or the whatever.
Can you tell us about the times when it's nothing?
No, but Scott can.
Okay, with that answer, I think that's a good time to segue to our next questioner.
Okay, hi, I'm Matt Wright. I'm also from Manhasset High School. My question goes to anyone, and it's, what is more common, people moving the sets or mechanical devices?
Wow. Well, I just came off a really heavily automated show, so with this one, it's a lot of people backstage pushing buttons, and it all has to do with, I think, the scale of the production, and also it has a lot to do with what the production demands. I mean, you could have a large Broadway show where you're manipulating these objects with manual means because it supports a vision of a show.
Yes.
This one was meant to be very effortless and magical, and things popping in and out and windows opening without any visible means. So it largely depends on, I think, just the tone of the show, and it's a lot of budget. I mean, it does get to budget at certain points as well. In Take Me Out, we have a table that's brought on stage, and it's something that we wanted to avoid, and now that we're doing it on Broadway, it's going to just be an automated telescoping table. It's a very, very simple piece, but it's just to clean up the stage picture and the transition. So it depends on the situation.
Scott's right. It's what's appropriate. I know in a production of an adaptation we just did of Barbara Ehrenreich's Nickel and Dimed, which is about the workforce, women in low-paying jobs, either like at a Denny's or it's a very popular, a book right now. It was adapted for the stage and multiple scenes, multiple scenes, and because it's a play about work and labor. We thought it would be appropriate if there was some effort involved in the moving around of some props, some furniture, within the context of a turntable which made transitions from one larger scene to the next. But the internal moves were all done manually, all by hand, to work in concert with the idea of a labor force that dealt with mainly with manual labor.
So sometimes it's needs and sometimes
Yeah.
it's budget.
With
Well,
the
it's like even
musical,
when you're
often
in town
budget.
also, it's like there was a laugh at one point because I guess there was a brownout on Broadway, and I got this phone call, yeah, we're the only show that didn't have any problems, because the whole
Right.
musical is done manually. I mean, not that there's a lot of moving scenery, but this wall that really tells the whole story.
Right.
It's a very, very stripped down idea of the production, and this sort of band of performers are telling the story, and right next door is another
But it's
musical
the
with
style
a zillion.
it's chosen
Absolutely.
It's very appropriate
Absolutely.
to that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Is there anything that keeps you from using an actor, though? Any union? Because that's part of it. You can't always have a union
Oh,
do
sure.
it.
There's
Yeah.
there are equity rules about when an actor can, if it's part of a scene, part of an entrance or an exit, they can move certain things. But you can't just gratuitously have an actor come on and say, move this chair, bring this
Right.
prop on, if they're not a part of the scene or it's they
Yeah.
somehow doesn't introduce them into the scene.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And our next questioner.
Hi there, my name is Jay Bloom-Rosen. I work at the Manhasset School District. I design their lights and sound, and I basically have warm and cool to work with. Any suggestions how I can be a little more creative, how I can make my lights apply to each show when I have such limited facilities?
Good question. This is a good time.
Oh my God, this is me.
This would be you.
You're on.
I never know how to light a show if I don't have more than X lights, and you haven't said how many you have.
About 50.
And you can do a great job. Great job. I was asked the question earlier about technology. Lighting people tend to get a bit obsessed with technology, and we are living through exciting times with it changing. It isn't very important in lighting technology. What's important is what's in your head. Your imagination is the foundation of lighting design, not technology. Now, the less you have, the more difficult it becomes, I freely admit. But with 50, you can do interesting stuff, unless the stage is 200 feet wide.
Good
It
question.
seems, if I can just say, it seems that sometimes I work on shows, and I look up, and all of a sudden you see 2,000 lights now. It's become sort of fashionable to use a huge amount of lights, and you'll go, wow, it's a one-set play. Okay.
I have.
No, but
Yeah.
it is a bit of a style now to use a lot of lights.
I have to admit, and I may betray my age or something, but I find it somewhat offensive, the amount of lights that are all too often used now. I mean, there are so many lights you can shine through a 45-foot proscenium opening, and if you've got over 400, it seems to be somewhat excessive. So I think modesty is a rather good idea. I try and use the minimum amount of equipment. I still use a lot, but I certainly never hang up something that I haven't got a real purpose for. I think it's irresponsible. I think we all have a responsibility to our producer, apart from anyone else. It all costs money.
All right.
And it comes down to really your idea for the...
It also takes electricity if you turn them all on, and that's irresponsible these days as well.
Next questioner, please.
Hi, my name is Rachel Musgrove, and I'm a teacher in Manhasset School District. And what could you say to the many very talented students going off to colleges about education in order to become a designer? What's the best education to get into?
What about you, Jane? Jane is actually a professor at Yale School of Drama, and perhaps she could take part of this.
Well, I guess after 26 years of seeing students come and go, I really feel that a wonderful education in life is the most important. To read, to have an understanding of plays and of literature, and to go and see as much as you can, and travel and get as many varied experiences as you can, because I don't think you can teach somebody to be a designer. I think it's in your soul, and you can have wonderful methods and good experiences, and good experiences with your peers, which I think is invaluable, and the people that you meet while you're at college that you come out with and sort of go on to do wonderful things. But I think to start, you need to observe and see what it is in the world that you're interested in, and sort of get as much education as you can roundly. And then it will help you.
It's like as set designers, we have to learn, we have to know so much. You have to master so many fields that, I mean, I found architecture incredibly helpful and just developing a sense of scale and proportion and getting an eye. But it's also like the visual arts, research is such a huge part of it all. Art history is such a major part, and really having facility with all of these facets, and then looking at, if you want to find a career in design, then look at refining all of those skills that you've brought to a life that you've had already. It's really important to travel, to like see things in Europe and look at painters. I'm fueled by modern art and architecture a lot, and it just fills my work.
Yeah.
And if I can say, to look at everything that your other designers are looking at too. I'm a costume designer, but I love looking at architecture. It informs you. Everything informs you. Looking at MTV and then going to see a really staged production at the Metropolitan the next night. Not that they're all staged productions, but I mean, if you see something that's really traditional, and then you see something that's really whack the next night, that's better than just saying, this is what I see, this is what I do. You know, look in this room and look at each other and sort of take an education from it. Stuff like that, everything.
Also, just avoiding opinions. Not to form opinions, not to listen to other people's opinions.
So ignore what I said.
All right, thank you. Next questioner, please.
Thank you. How does one get hired in the design field? Do you have any secrets of, other than the usual? Do you have any pearls of wisdom?
I'd like
answering in it.
How do you get hired? A lot of people find that the connections they make in school, you know, since we're talking about designers, the connections you make with other students that are directors somehow will connect. There's that. But how do you address the person who comes to New York that didn't go to Yale, didn't go to NYU, but came to, or who didn't study design at all? You know, where do you go to find the source for being hired? Where does that person land is, I think, who we should address. I mean, I think we can be more help to the person who's sort of at sea here in New York for the first time or wherever you might land.
I think in the lighting field, the assistant route is a very valuable one.
Yes.
Is it parallel in costume and theatre?
Yes,
I think it must
yes,
be,
it is.
I mean, many people have worked as assistants to other people, and you know, you can easily out-impress yourself with your producer. And, you know, when the aged senior designer is relaxing, you can go up to the producer and win him over, and he'll hire you next time.
The other thing is that there are several of us belong to or have studios in New York that are comprised of either just one person or two or three or four different people. I mean, I always encourage people that come to interview that have found a way to the studio I work in. I inform them of the other studios and the other designers that I know, and sometimes, if I can, if it's a listed telephone number, we'll provide them with a telephone number to go and interview at other studios with other designers and offer yourself as an intern. I mean, you have to be willing not to, you know, make a living at it for a while, and I think part of, you know, coming to New York, if that's what we're talking about,
it's very difficult.
It is difficult. I mean, you know how you support yourself, where you live, your circle of friends, I think is also very important. Just who your circle, your buddies, you know, and if there are other actors that you hang out with or artists that you hang out. I mean, we are a little bit more selective, but I find that younger people, generations coming up after us, are hanging out more with like visual artists or with filmmakers or with the other related fields. It's not just theater, and I think that's a great thing. I think opening up the venue to the experience of other fields is good, and also multiplies the number of opportunities that may or may not come your way just by, did you hear about, you know?
And following up on contacts with people that you make, keeping in touch with people. And, you know, if ever there's an opportunity to say, well, you know, I'd like to do this, go in and, you know, be kind of strong about that.
Is it also important to say that it's a very, very tough life for 99% of the people who try and do it? And you should only think about it if you cannot possibly conceive of spending your life any other way.
I don't know that I would.
Yes, Richard.
What were you going to say?
Sorry, Ron.
That just depressed me. But actually, I very much agree with what Richard says.
Well,
and I say it to people who come to my door, but I say it actually not about designers. I say it specifically about costume design, I'm afraid. But I do think coming in with a really great attitude, you know, a real positive, shy is not a good thing. Because we need people with positive coming in. We're often, if you guys are like me, bombed out with so much work that we enjoy energy coming at us. Energy begats energy. And you also have to just practically, if you come to my door, you sort of have to know something about what you can do for me. If you come and say, if your only sentence is, I need to learn, and you would be someone to learn from, it's like, that's great, but do you know what to do? You know, just because it is hard. We fight for the people that we hire. No one freely gives us assistant money, do they? Is anyone different on this board? You know, you really fight for it. So it's hard if you have to come with a big, willing attitude and some facility, I think, that we can use. You do have to say that, don't you?
I don't, actually. Okay. I have an intern in the studio right now who's just out of undergrad school and is clearly a very, very talented fellow, but it doesn't come with those skills. And I think those are more mature skills about maturity and how one handles oneself in this particular world, in this very specific discipline. I mean, I find it rare that, you know, someone would be so, you know, so tailor-made in terms of their point of view or how they could handle me in a way that I would find them someone attractive to work with. I find the interesting person someone who isn't that polished yet, who isn't that slick, you know, that doesn't know how to work me. In fact,
I don't think you're
that's
saying
not what I'm
that
saying.
really.
No, I meant if someone comes to my door and they say, I want to work with you, then I'll go, okay, do you have a problem doing copies of research? Can you research? I mean, I just mean practical stuff like that. I don't really need to make a friend of someone who comes in the door. That kind of thing. But it means that if someone comes up and they want to work with me on a show, and I need to know that they know their way around New York and they know how to go into a fabric store and look for fabrics, that's what I mean. That's what I need. You know?
Where are the schools of design here in New York that you can go to?
Well, there's NYU,
right,
and Parsons, and FIT.
Well, and Yale is
and
sort of...
then Yale is in New Haven, and
right.
there are Carnegie Mellon, and
but I came from
many schools.
But I came from Michigan.
You came from Michigan,
and I
from
didn't know any directors or anything when I got here, and I guess I was just wouldn't go away.
But it's, I mean, I came from Arizona, and I came here and I started working in dance, and was an assistant to a painter who was doing things downtown at the kitchen, and then I started befriending the dancers and would do their shows when they did smaller shows, and it was just this process of getting through that. And then at one point I decided, you know, I want to go away and concentrate on text, because I felt like I was doing work in the dance world. I started doing independent film. I wanted to get back to what I set out to do when I came to New York, and I needed to take time away and concentrate on text, so I chose to go to grad school to do that. But keep doing your own work. Like, get out there. Yeah. If you're assisting people, I have assistants that are doing their own shows, and I completely support them in doing that. They have to be doing their work, too, so you get the development of a portfolio. It's critical that you start assembling your own work, whether it's through a graduate program or just through sheer just getting out there and doing it.
All right. We have another questioner here.
Hi, my name is Brendan Cole. I come from Manhasset High School. This question is for everyone. What is the hardest show that you've worked on, and why?
What is the hardest show you've worked on?
Scott.
Lessons? What lessons can you impart with us today?
Amor was a tough one that I just finished. Just a lot of lessons in that. A lot of great things, but it just was technology was tricky. A lot of automation in a small theater with a short technical period. But, you know, there's that adage of, like, you're not an expert until you've made every mistake in your field. So I think there's a lot of value to, like, learning through bumping up the, you know, the scale and sophistication of your projects. More was just a tricky one, just all the way around. I think collectively the design team found it difficult, but I think in the end very gratifying and just very beautiful. The experience was rewarding.
How about you?
Most difficult?
Yeah. Are those the ones you try to forget?
Well, I was just going to say, you know, you do try to forget all the, I mean, difficult implies, you know, some hard experiences and some, I mean, I suppose difficult technically can be one thing. And maybe that's what you mean. And
I have a difficult one.
Go on,
I'll
tell
the story. No, but because it was a different sort of thing. A production of Coriolanus, directed by Stephen Berghoff, at the Public Theater with Chris Walken. And he came in from he has his own theater company in London, and he came in with a credo of how you should do theater. And I guess I can say now that people weren't really telling him that we worked differently here. You know, that the unions were different, the actors' hours were different, the actors would react differently. And of course, this is always hard. They're telling me there's no money, and they're telling him he can have everything
he wants.
That made it pretty difficult. It was very hard. It ended up, ironically, even though it was like well, no one did talk to each other. You know, it ended up being a hit, I think, just because it was a weird, great combination of genius in there with Chris Walken and his doing what he does, and Irene Worth, and these actors all sort of coming in and doing something in an empty room. But I'll always remember that as a difficult thing, just because we didn't know how to talk to each other within the process, and somehow we got away with it.
And it's also like, I mean, through the difficulty of this project, remaining steadfast and being committed to the vision, and you know that it's going to get there. It's just sometimes it's just a little trickier, and sometimes things just don't come together as easily as you would hope. But just keep pushing; it's going to get there. The technical things, those get worked out. You know, it just takes time, and just keep pushing along.
But you had a good leader.
I had a great leader. James Lapine was brilliant and had an incredibly brilliant vision, and we got there, and we're all pleased and thrilled with it.
What about the unions? In order to get into the theater and work in the production, you have to belong to the union? All right.
Well, you know, unions, of course, are a question that are difficult to answer, and it's many layered. We've sort of run out of time today, and I want to take this opportunity to thank all of our wonderful panelists for sharing their time, experience, and talent with us today. And we hope that you've enjoyed this panel as much as I have. This has been the American Theater Wing's Working in the Theater seminar, coming to you from the Graduate Center of the City University of New York. Thank you.
Thank you.